Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to a little poem that has often been overlooked, and yet I'm going to argue that I think Whitman is doing some really kind of important work here in this little poem, Rich Givers. This is poem number 12 of the 29 poems of By the Roadside. Some have argued that this is Whitman meeting Thoreau or paying attention to Thoreau in his most obvious way. You'll remember that Walden was published in 1854, and this poem will be given its date of 1860, so you can see the proximity. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net, down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt, our playlist, and you've been working with us in your own, I hope, annotated version of Leaves of Grass, from the inscriptions poems all the way up into and including a set of introductory comments to By the Roadside, and then finally we just worked with I Look Out. We now will turn to our Nortons to get a bit of background information. I'm going to give a little bit more background observations just for this poem because I find it such a fascinating poem. Under this title, one of the messenger leaves of Grass 1860. The poem was ungrouped in Leaves of Grass 1867, placed among the Songs of Parting group in 71 and 76, and in the present group in 1881. Now I want to remind you of some of the remarkable echoes. Do you guys remember this set of lines from Song of Myself, passage 14? He says it this way. He says, "What is commonest, cheapest, nearest, easiest is me," and he capitalized the M. "Me going in for my chances, spending for vast returns, adorning myself to bestow myself on the first that will take me, not asking the sky to come down to my goodwill, scattering it freely forever." And we talked about in our exegesis of this set of lines kind of where he was. I just want you to hear especially this use of the word bestow or give. A few lines later in Song of Myself 40, do you guys remember this set of lines? I'll take you there and we'll play around with this one really quickly. He says it this way: "Flaunt of the sunshine, I need not your bask, lie over you light surfaces only, I force surfaces and depths also. Earth, you seem to look for something at my hands. Say, old topknot, what do you want? Man or woman, I might tell how I like you, but cannot, and might tell what it is in me and what it is in you, but cannot, and might tell that pining I have, that pulse of my nights and days. Behold, I do not give lectures or a little charity. When I give myself. You there, impotent, loosen the knees, open your scarved chops till I blow grit within you, spread your palms and lift the flaps of your pockets. I'm not to be denied, I compel. I have stores plenty and to spare, and anything I have, I bestow. I do not ask who you are, that's not important to me. You can do nothing and be nothing, but what I will enfold you." Again, this idea of bestowing or giving. In Songs of Occupation, you'll remember this set of lines when we messed around with it. And hopefully you'll hear this echo as well. In Songs of Occupation, the opening lines of passage number 1, he says, "Neither a servant nor a master I take no sooner a large price than a small price. I will have my own whoever enjoys me. I will be even with you, and you shall be even with me. If you stand at work in a shop, I stand as nigh to the nearest in the same shop. If you bestow gifts on your brother or dearest friend, I demand as good as your brother or dearest friend." Now, I have said to you guys that I'm convinced that Whitman in Leaves of Grass is having a great time. And I believe in the section called By the Roadside that he is doing some very intentional kinds of activities. Do you remember that we have Hamlet on stage with his famous to be or not to be speech? We've given full lectures on it elsewhere at LearnStrong.net. The speech will end, "Thus conscience makes cowards of us all." And you'll remember that Ophelia will come onto the stage and he will call her a nymph, a mermaid, of course, a slang term for maybe treating her inappropriately already. Of course, later she will commit suicide and mermaid-like will sink down to the bottom. So obviously we're seeing all kinds of interesting things happening in the scene. But do you remember that she's breaking up with Hamlet? And she will hand him, it's usually a note, a gift, some kind of a trinket, a ring, something like that. And do you remember that she says, To the noble mind, rich gifts wax poor when givers prove unkind. Now, Of course, there's all kinds of loaded meaning behind that line. I think Whitman is playing with that line in this poem, two rich givers. What you give me, I cheerfully accept. A little sustenance, a hut and garden, a little money as I rendezvous with my poems, a traveler's lodging and breakfast as journey through the states. Why should I be ashamed to own such gifts? Why to advertise for them? For I myself am not one who bestows nothing upon man and woman, for I bestow upon any man or woman the entrance to all the gifts of the universe. Now I find this a remarkable passage. He will say in Song of Myself, passage 24, you my rich blood, and that of course will take us to this use of his word rich. What you give me, I cheerfully accept. Now again, this direct address stuff, and he does this all the way through Leaves of Grass, and especially of course in By the Roadside Poems. Notice right away he says, what you give me, I cheerfully accept. Well, what is that you give me? Probably we would argue mostly attention. But notice here it's more than attention. It's a little sustenance. It's a hut and a garden. Immediately makes us think of Thoreau's Walden. A little money. And we've already said that when we study Whitman's biography, Whitman only ever had a little money. He never was able to amass the amount of wealth that he could have amassed. Unfortunately, he didn't amass. His estate didn't amass until long, long after, obviously, with the publishing and the republishing of Leaves of Grass. He says, as I rendezvous with my poems, you'll remember this rendezvous from Song of Myself, passage 45. As I rendezvous with my poems, it's a great little verb to tie. It's almost as if his poems exist somewhere out there, and Whitman kind of, bumping around in the universe, stumbles onto these lines that we'll call Song of the Open Road, or, passage 52 of Song of Myself, or whatever. A traveler's lodging, of course, this takes us back to Song of Myself 46, and the idea that we're on this journey together. Lodging and breakfast, he even mentions breakfast, a little milk, you'll remember, as he sent you on your egress hence, as journey through the states. And again, he's always going back to Homer and the Odyssey and the journey. Notice states being capitalized. In other words, my work, my rendezvousing with these poems is all about the states, right? All about what I share, what I give. Why should I, and then he asks these rhetorical questions, which we're obviously very familiar with. Why should I be ashamed to own such gifts? You'll remember this ashamed word in I Seek the Body Electric, passage 5. Why should I be ashamed to own such gifts? Why to advertise for them? Now there's all kinds of hidden language here, and I have to believe that he's smiling as he's playing this game, because Whitman wrote many of his own editorials about his own poems, Leaves of Grass, only he did it anonymously. In other words, he would attribute to somebody else what he himself was doing, and of course we're familiar with this today in any number of venues when, for example, an artist wants to promote something that they have done, and will often do it that way, where, write something and then attribute it to somebody else or to an anonymous source when it's in fact you. So he was constantly advertising. And you could make the argument that all the way through Leaves of Grass, you have poems like this where Whitman continues to advertise what it is that he is bestowing, he is giving. And to use the word bestow is intentional because it's coming. The word for, of course, twice. In other words, here's the argument for why Whitman should very much give as much as he is receiving. For I myself, which is ironic given, right, that we're playing with, Song of Myself. For I myself am not one who bestows nothing upon man and woman. And again, I think that it's a different time when Whitman is publishing Leaves of Grass. So, for example, the word nothing would elicit immediately memories of King Lear and Nothing Comes of Nothing and those opening lines with Cordelia. Bestows nothing upon man and woman, for I bestow upon any man or woman, and again taking us back to the words bestow, which is why I read those from earlier places. The entrance, and this is, I go back to those final lines, the beginning lines and the final lines of Four Quartets. And this whole notion of entering into the garden, the opening lines of Burnt Norton, we enter into the garden of Burnt Norton. We've given full lectures on this at learnstrong.net. And then the very last lines in Little Gidding 5, where we're back to that same garden again, the idea of entrance. And obviously this takes us to Milton, and it takes us to Paradise and Eden and all of that. The entrance to all, he loves this word all, I've shown you guys this before, all the gifts of the universe. By the way, gifts of the universe used only one time in all Leaves of Grass, and it's right here in this poem. Now, You'll maybe remember that in Song of the Answer, he will say with this word bestows, he resolves all tongues into his own and bestows it upon men. This idea of giving, I've told you guys that I really do believe that you can't really read Leaves of Grass without understanding that Whitman was a teacher, and I think he remained a teacher all his life, that which he wishes to give, especially to students. With that in mind, to finish now at 2a, well, I think that the argument that's being made here among many of them is that great artists always will be givers, and great art is always symbolic. The artist is as much rewarded as the audience, and this takes us, of course, back to a number of theorists, especially we think of Aristotle and his Poetics, where he will argue that the real drama is not happening on stage, but the real drama is happening in the audience, who is, of course, engaging in catharsis, purgation, as the fall of the protagonist happens and the audience is feeling those two key, of course, emotions of fear and pity. At 2b, again, the direct address is here, but I have to ask you guys, what do you think about why this poem is specifically in the collection of poems called By the Roadside? You could come up with any number of answers. And by the way, if you look at placement, I think that's also kind of fascinating. We will have, right before Two Rich Givers, we'll have Learned Astronomer, Perfection's O Mio Life, and then that interesting little poem to a president that we'll come back to at the end of Roadside. Then I sit and look out. All of those observational poems, with the exception of To a President, make all the sense in the world for Roadside. And then all of a sudden, here we are to Rich Givers. And then we will follow with the most famous of all of the poems from Roadside, The Dalliance of the Eagles, which is one of the most controversial poems. And then we will finish By the Roadside with a series of these very, very short little poems. So what's going on? I think one of the things that he's saying is, hey, I'm just reminding you what I'm giving to you, what you are receiving in the process of reading Leaves of Grass. Of course, we've mentioned at 3a, Thoreau's Walden and Aristotelian Poetics and Hamlet 3. I want to take us, though, to a poem that's coming. We will get there. It's called By Blue Ontario's Shore, and I want to take you to passage number 10 really quickly. And we're gesturing towards. When we hit passage 10, we will remind ourselves, I hope, that we were here with this Rich Givers passage. Of these states, he says it this way, of these states, notice capitalized, of these states the poet is the equitable man. Not in him, but off from him things are grotesque, eccentric, fail their full returns. Nothing out of its place is good, nothing in its place is bad. He bestows on every object or quality its fit proportion, and there's our word bestows, right? Neither more nor less. He is the arbiter of the diverse. He's the key. He's the equalizer of his land and age. He supplies what wants supplying. He checks what wants checking, and peace out of him speaks the spirit of peace. Large, rich, there's our word rich, thrifty, building populous towns, encouraging agriculture, arts, commerce, lighting the sky of man, the soul, health, immortality, government. In war, he's the best backer of the war. He fetches artillery as good as the engineers. He can make every word he speaks draw blood. It's a compelling line. We'll have to study it later. The years straying towards infidelity he withholds, but by his steady faith. He's no arguer. He is judgment. And then in parenthetics, nature accepts him absolutely. Nature capitalized in parenthetics. He judges not as the judge judges, but as the sun failing round helpless thing. He sees the furthest, he has the most faith. His thoughts are the hymns of the praise of things. In the dispute on God and eternity, he is silent. We're going to come to his theology much more later in Leaves of Grass. He sees eternity less like a play with a prologue and denouement. He sees eternity in men and women. He does not see men and women as dreams or dots. For the great idea, capitalized idea, the idea of perfect and free individuals, for that, the bard walks in advance, leader of leaders. The attitude of him cheers up slaves and horrifies foreign despots. It's an interesting line. We'll have to answer what exactly it is that he means. Without extinction is liberty, capitalized. Without retrograde is equality, capitalized. They live in the feelings of young men and the best of women. And then in parenthetics, not for nothing, and here's the use of that word, have the indomitable heads of the earth been always ready to fall, for liberty, capitalized. That's the end of that passage, number 10. We're obviously going to place that passage in the larger context of the poem, but I just wanted to give you a heads up. Why? Because there is a tendency to hit by the roadside, if you're a reader of every poem of Leaves of Grass, and to say, you know, these are kind of inconsequential poems, I'm not sure that they matter that much. I'm of the opinion that everything that Whitman did with Leaves of Grass has some kind of meaning. Now, obviously, we're going to put some kind of hierarchy or taxonomy on these poems, and obviously, we're going to put some poems in front of other poems, no question. But I just want to point out, I think that Whitman is doing something really profound and simple in this poem. And finally, it does lead us to 3b, and how you can own a poem like this. What's a time that you gave a gift, but you got more in return? I can easily answer that for myself by saying I have been committed to giving you guys this gift of Whitman and his poems. I'm giving you a little bit of Leaves of Grass, but man, I'm getting so much more in return. It's quite remarkable. Speaking of giving and returning, let's go to Dalliance of Eagles. Thank you.